1776 prophecy reveals shocking secret of Black Israelites. In the year 1776, the world witnessed America declare her independence. The ringing words of liberty did not merely echo across the earth, they thundered like a promise of a new age, announcing the birth of a nation that claimed freedom as its foundation. Yet beneath the fireworks of revolution and the ink upon parchment, there was something far more unsettling. A prophecy, profound and terrifying, buried in silence for centuries. This was no ordinary prophecy, but a revelation that bound America's destiny to an ancient people, an identity obscured, denied, and violently suppressed the Black Israelites. What if the very year of America's independence was also the moment the divine clock began to turn? What if the so-called birth of freedom was not freedom at all, but the echo of bondage foretold, reverberating through scripture, oceans, and centuries? What if the story of America, with all its glory and contradictions, is inseparably woven into the story of the children of Israel, those scattered in chains, stripped of name, language, and inheritance, yet destined by prophecy to rise again? This is the truth mainstream historians dare not touch, for it threatens to unravel the comfortable myths of democracy, empire, and religion. The prophecy of 1776 is not only about America, it is about identity, destiny, and the unveiling of truths long hidden in the shadows. Today, I do not whisper this forbidden knowledge. I proclaim it, like a light breaking through the fog of historical amnesia. And if this revelation shakes you, if it makes you question what you thought you knew about history, I invite you to subscribe, to leave your thoughts in the comments, and to join the conversation. For together, we must confront the truths that were buried and dare to see the prophecy that has now come alive. 1776, prophecy uncovered, the secret they tried to erase from history. The year 1776 is often lifted like a torch, celebrated as the dawn of liberty, the triumph of men who broke chains and cast off the yoke of a distant king. Its memory is engraved upon monuments, echoed in classrooms, and recited in speeches that promise freedom as America's eternal inheritance. Yet beneath the fireworks and declarations lies a silence that trembles with a question history has never answered. Why does Scripture seem to mark this same year as a turning point in the destiny of another people, the scattered tribes of Israel? Could it be mere coincidence, or is there, hidden beneath the surface, a deeper rhythm pulsing through time, connecting the American Revolution to the thunder of biblical prophecy? When one looks closely, the parallels cannot be dismissed. 1776 was not simply the signing of parchment or the raising of banners. It was the beginning of a seismic shift across the globe. Empires cracked, revolutions ignited, and the modern age staggered into being. Yet while liberty was shouted in the halls of Congress, another cry rose from America's soil, though few dared to listen. It was the cry of enslaved men, women, and children torn violently from their homelands, stripped of language, memory, and identity, laboring beneath the lash in the very land proclaiming that all men are created equal. What is this contradiction? Was it hypocrisy, men proclaiming liberty while practicing bondage? Or was it something far more unsettling? Could it have been prophecy? Ancient texts whisper of a chosen people scattered to the four corners of the earth, bearing the heavy yoke of captivity, yet destined for an awakening at the appointed time. They spoke of curses inscribed across generations, of ships carrying them into foreign lands, of names erased and dignity crushed. And yet, in those same scriptures, there was the promise of remembrance, the assurance that when the clock struck, the hidden would be revealed and the forgotten would rise. The founding of America, in all its contradiction and grandeur, was not random. It was aligned with that divine clock. The lost link between 1776 and the Black Israelites is not an invention of imagination, but a thread woven into the tapestry of prophecy. America's birth, that proud trumpet of liberty, was inseparable from the bondage of those who carried the blood of Israel within their veins. To acknowledge this truth is to confront an unbearable paradox. For how can a nation boast of freedom while fulfilling the role of captor? How can its founding documents shine with ideals of justice while its fields groaned with the sweat of enslaved Israelites? The paradox is not a flaw in the narrative, it is the narrative itself. It is the fulfillment of prophecy written long before Jefferson put quill to parchment, long before Washington raised a sword, long before the cry of revolution echoed across the Atlantic. And yet, modern historians recoil from this revelation, not because the evidence is weak, but because its implications are too strong. To admit that the enslaved were not merely Africans, but Israelites, living embodiments of ancient prophecy, is to dismantle the cherished myth of American exceptionalism. It is to confess that what has been celebrated as progress was also captivity, that the shining beacon of liberty was built upon the fulfillment of a biblical curse too dangerous to speak aloud. Such a confession does not merely alter history, it turns it upside down. So the secret was buried. It was erased from textbooks, where children learned of freedom, but not of prophecy. It was silenced in churches, where preachers thundered about salvation, but would not dare to name the Israelites in chains before them. It was dismissed in universities as myth, relegated to the margins, whispered about only in hidden corners, where truth still dared to breathe. For centuries, the world was taught to forget. But truth is a fire that refuses to die. Even when buried beneath layers of denial, it smolders. Even when dismissed as legend, it burns silently in the conscience of the oppressed. And when the appointed hour comes, that fire roars back to life. Today, that fire is roaring. The secret they tried to erase is crying out to be heard. To an American ear trained to hear only one version of 1776, this truth may sound like thunder. For it forces us to ask, was liberty truly born in that year, or was bondage given a new stage upon which prophecy could unfold? Was America the land of freedom, or was it Egypt reborn, holding the descendants of Israel in its grasp until the day of awakening? The more one peers into this paradox, the more the veil begins to tear. The enslaved were not nameless bodies chained in fields. They were a chosen people, hidden in plain sight. Their suffering was not meaningless cruelty, it was the echo of Scripture. Their silence was not absence, it was anticipation, awaiting the hour when prophecy would speak. And now, as history turns once again, the silence is breaking. Voices long suppressed are rising, declaring identity, reclaiming memory, and unveiling the truth buried since 1776. This is not mere history, it is destiny awakening. It is the rhythm of prophecy beating once more through the corridors of time, demanding that America face the paradox it was built upon. For the truth cannot be buried forever. No monument, no textbook, no government decree can silence what has been written in both Scripture and suffering. The prophecy they tried to erase is now alive, and its voice is calling across the land. America may celebrate 1776 as its birth, but prophecy remembers it as a turning point, the moment when the story of the Black Israelites and the story of this nation became inseparably entwined. And so the question remains, one that echoes like thunder through history's silence. Was 1776 merely the year of America's freedom, or was it the year the hidden prophecy began to unfold, a prophecy that now demands to be revealed? The forbidden identity, why Black Israelites were written out of the narrative. Identity is power. To know who you are is to stand rooted in the soil of dignity, to walk with the weight of destiny upon your shoulders, to speak with an authority that cannot be bought or broken. It is the foundation upon which freedom is built and the light that guides a people through the shadows of history. And yet, for the Black Israelites, that identity was not merely ignored, it was stolen, erased, rewritten, and buried beneath centuries of lies. Because to reveal the truth of their lineage would have shaken the very foundations of empire. To allow the oppressed to remember their covenant with the Most High would have been to loosen chains not only of iron but of the mind, and empires cannot survive when truth awakens the enslaved. From the moment the transatlantic slave trade tore them from their ancestral homes, this people endured more than physical bondage. Their very names were stripped away, replaced with labels that branded them as property. Their languages were silenced, their histories rewritten, their spiritual inheritance locked behind walls of deception. They were baptized into false identities, called Negroes, Africans, slaves, while the true blood that ran through their veins, the lineage of Israel itself, was hidden. This was no accident. It was no mere cruelty born of ignorance. It was a deliberate erasure, a conscious act of empire, because the oppressors knew that a people who remembered their true covenant could never be fully subdued. Chains can shackle the body, but memory liberates the soul. Religious and political powers conspired together to cement this erasure. The church, draped in robes of piety, yet complicit with empire, preached a gospel that justified bondage. Pulpits thundered about obedience while silencing the cries of the enslaved. Scripture was twisted into chains, its words distorted to sanctify oppression. And in doing so, the church concealed a truth it dared not speak, that these enslaved souls bore the very marks of prophecy, that their suffering was foretold in the holy texts they read, but refused to interpret honestly. Meanwhile, political rulers crafted constitutions that sang of liberty while binding Israelites in law, ensuring that freedom was a song reserved for some but not all. Together, church and state built a grand theater of forgetting. They wrote a script in which the Black Israelites had no part, erasing them from the story of nations, hiding them from their own reflection, turning chosen people into nameless shadows. But ancient texts do not lie, no matter how many hands try to rewrite them. The prophecies recorded in Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and Revelation speak with a clarity that history cannot silence. They tell of a people scattered to the four corners of the earth, despised, enslaved, and forgotten by men, but never forgotten by God. They speak of ships that would carry them across seas, of yokes of iron pressed against their necks, of names stripped away until even memory grew faint. And yet, within those same prophecies, there is also the promise of awakening. There is the assurance that the scattered would not remain lost forever, that the exiles would remember, and that the time of their return to identity would come like a flood that no empire could stop. This is why the forbidden identity was hidden. It revealed too much. It revealed that the oppressed were not merely slaves, but the descendants of a chosen people. It revealed that history was not a random tale of cruelty, but a prophetic unfolding written centuries before. And it revealed that the great powers of this world, nations, empires, churches, were not merely complicit in injustice, but active participants in a campaign against divine destiny. To admit the truth was to unmask the hypocrisy of freedom built on chains, of justice proclaimed from thrones of blood, of salvation preached while prophecy was suppressed. But identity cannot be buried forever. Truth is a seed, and though it may lie hidden beneath the soil of silence, it will one day break through, splitting stone and tearing roots until it breathes in open air. The reclaiming of identity is not merely an act of remembrance. It is an act of revolution. For once a people know who they are, no empire, no church, no government can contain them. Knowledge of true identity shatters chains of inferiority, breaks the spell of lies, and awakens a power that was always waiting. To reclaim this identity is to rise. It is to walk no longer as nameless, faceless shadows, but as Israel restored, as a people whose suffering has been sanctified by prophecy and whose awakening is destined by God. It is to declare that history cannot define destiny, that oppression cannot extinguish covenant, and that no empire is stronger than truth revealed. This is why their identity was forbidden, because it was the key to memory, the key to power, the key to liberation that no master could control. And as the scattered awaken, as the forbidden truth begins to be spoken once more, the foundations of empire tremble. For identity, once reclaimed, is unstoppable. From bondage to prophecy, how America's rise mirrors a biblical blueprint. The American Revolution is often retold as a story of triumph, a narrative painted in bold strokes of courage and liberty. Colonists rising against tyranny, demanding freedom, and forging a nation that would call itself the land of the free. The images are familiar flags waving, muskets raised, words of independence etched into history with the ink of resolve. And yet, beneath this triumphant tale lies another story, less celebrated, less spoken, yet infinitely more profound. What if America's rise was not merely a political event, but a spiritual echo? What if it was not just history unfolding, but prophecy being fulfilled, a mirror of the ancient journey of Israel, a blueprint written long before a single musket fired at Lexington. In the biblical narrative, Egypt was both promise and prison. It was in Egypt that Israel found sustenance in famine, but it was also in Egypt that Israel was bound in chains, oppressed, and silenced. Egypt is the paradox of history, a land that nurtures even as it enslaves. And in this paradox, America mirrors the same role. For some, America became the land of opportunity, a beacon of hope. But for others, the Israelites scattered by slavery, it was Egypt once more, a place of bondage disguised in the language of liberty. This parallel is no accident. It is not coincidence. It is prophecy. The prophecy speaks with chilling clarity. A chosen people, scattered across the seas, would endure centuries of captivity. They would be silenced, their names erased, their memory buried, yet their story would not end in chains. From bondage would come awakening, from oppression would come prophecy fulfilled. America's rise in 1776, hailed as the dawn of freedom, was also the turning of the prophetic clock. Just as Israel's exodus came at a divinely appointed hour, so too did America's birthmark not just political independence, but the beginning of a countdown for the Israelites hidden within her borders. Consider the irony that pulses at the heart of this nation's story. America proclaimed liberty from Britain while simultaneously denying liberty to millions within her own land. The ink had barely dried on the words, "All men are created equal," before those same hands continued to chain men, women, and children whose only crime was carrying the blood of Israel. To call this hypocrisy is to speak too softly. It is not simply contradiction, it is fulfillment. For prophecy foretold that a nation of great power would rise, a nation that would embody both Egypt and Babylon, the liberator and the oppressor, the land of freedom for some, and the land of bondage for others. This contradiction is not the flaw of America's story, it is the blueprint of prophecy itself. The paradox of liberty and bondage dwelling side by side was foretold long before Jefferson's quill touched parchment. America did not escape prophecy. It stepped into its role, willingly or not, as the stage upon which the great drama of Israel's destiny would unfold. But prophecy does not end with chains. It speaks also of a turning point, of an awakening. The texts declare that the captives will not remain forgotten forever. A time would come when the scattered would remember who they are, when the voices silenced by empire would rise in chorus, reclaiming the covenant that oppression could not erase. That turning point did not begin when emancipation was signed, nor when civil rights were demanded. It began in 1776 itself. Not because liberty was granted, but because prophecy declared that the clock had begun to tick. The very year America declared its independence was the year the stage was set for Israel's awakening within her. To see America clearly, one must not look through the narrow lens of patriotism alone, but through the eyes of prophecy. For America's story is not merely political, nor merely historical. It is biblical. It is spiritual. It is divine orchestration. To see only muskets and speeches is to miss the deeper hand guiding history. For in America's rise, we see a mirror of Israel's journey, from promise to bondage, from bondage to prophecy, from prophecy to deliverance. What does this mean for us now? It means that history is not random. It is not merely the record of men's ambitions and wars, but the unfolding of a script written long before nations ever existed. It means that America is not merely a country, it is a stage, a vessel through which prophecy has been revealed. And it means that the story of the Black Israelites is not marginal, not incidental, but central to the very fabric of America's destiny. The Revolution of 1776 may have been the cry of colonists seeking liberty, but in the deeper register of prophecy, it was also the sounding of a trumpet. It signaled that the hidden people within her, the Israelites bound in fields and shacks, were not forgotten. Their story was not erased. Their deliverance, like Israel's in Egypt, was already written. America's rise was not separate from their destiny. It would bound to it inseparably and eternally. And so, when we look at 1776, we must look with new eyes, not only as a triumph of men casting off a king, but as the beginning of a divine drama. For in the mirror of prophecy, America is both Egypt and Babylon, both promise and prison. And within her borders, the children of Israel endure, awaken, and rise. History then is not chaos. It is not a tale of accidents. It is a blueprint, a living testament that what was written shall come to pass. America's rise is not just a tale of revolution. It is a chapter in prophecy. And when we see it through the eyes of truth, the question is no longer whether prophecy is real, but whether we are ready to face the destiny it reveals. Shocking evidence that changes everything. The prophecy is coming true. Now, we stand today not at the edge of history as we have known it, but at the threshold of revelation. What was hidden in 1776, what was buried beneath centuries of silence and denial, is now being unveiled before our very eyes. The prophecy is not some distant legend or myth to be studied in dusty archives. It is alive, breathing, and unfolding in our time. The evidence is not abstract or theoretical. It is tangible, undeniable, and glaring with such force that no honest heart can look away. Look around you. The signs are written across the world like thunder in the sky. Identity is being reclaimed. Truths that were long buried beneath the soil of empire are breaking through like seeds sprouting from the earth. The scattered are awakening, the forgotten are remembering, and a people long told they were nameless are now declaring their name with boldness: Israel. Across America and beyond, the descendants of the Black Israelites are rising, no longer silent, no longer hidden, no longer bound by the chains of imposed amnesia. They are embracing the covenant that empire tried to strip away. They are challenging the lies that textbooks, pulpits, and governments sought to engrave as truth. This awakening is not random. It is not coincidence. It is the precise unfolding of prophecy. The signs are everywhere, if only we dare to see. Social upheavals are not merely politics as usual. They are the cries of a people rediscovering their heritage, shaking off centuries of imposed falsehood. Movements for justice, equality, and remembrance echo the ancient longing for deliverance recorded in Scripture. When voices rise in the streets demanding dignity, it is not only political revolt, it is prophecy manifesting. The spirit of Israel awakening within a people who can no longer be silenced. The very systems that once held the power to suppress truth, churches that distorted the word, governments that rewrote history, schools that erased memory, are now trembling under the weight of revelation. For truth once hidden cannot remain in chains forever. And was this not foretold? Scripture declared that in the latter days, knowledge would increase and the hidden things would be revealed. What once was sealed is now opened. What once was called myth is now recognized as memory. The veil of ignorance is being torn, and in its place, the light of recognition is flooding in. This is not the invention of imagination. It is the unfolding of what was written, the unveiling of what was promised. That Israel would awaken, that the scattered would rise, that the chosen would remember. Why does this matter? Because it changes everything. If the Black Israelites are indeed the very people spoken of in prophecy, then history itself must be reread, re-examined, rewritten. It means that what America has told itself about liberty and equality was never the full story. It means that what empires have proclaimed about civilization and progress was built upon a deliberate concealment of destiny. It means that the story of religion, of politics, of nations, must all be confronted with a truth that refuses to be silenced. The chosen people were never lost. They were hidden in plain sight. And what does this mean for the future? It means that the time of silence is over. The truth, long buried, has risen like a trumpet blast across the earth, and it cannot be ignored. The prophecy of 1776, the one hidden beneath fireworks and declarations, is now resounding with a clarity too loud for denial. It means that America, and indeed all nations, must reckon with the divine reality that the Israelites are awakening, and with awakening comes a shift in destiny. The narrative of the oppressed is no longer a footnote. It is the centerpiece of prophecy, the pivot upon which history now turns. This revelation is not comfortable. It is not polite. It does not flatter nations or soothe empires. It disrupts. It exposes. It demands that we confront what we have refused to see. For centuries, America has celebrated liberty while building upon bondage, proclaimed freedom while silencing prophecy. But the evidence now stands like a mirror, and in it, we are forced to see ourselves not as we imagine, but as we are. The shocking evidence changes everything. It changes who we are, because it declares that identity is not what empire assigned, but what prophecy ordained. It changes where we came from, because it reveals that the enslaved were not a people without history, but a people with the most sacred lineage of all. And it changes where we are going, because it announces that the awakening is not a passing moment, but the beginning of a transformation that no nation, no power, no empire can halt. As prophecy comes true before our very eyes, we are faced with a choice. To deny the truth is to remain blind, clinging to illusions that crumble in our hands. To embrace it is to step into the light of destiny, to walk in the recognition that history was never random, that suffering was never meaningless, that the scattered were never forgotten. The trumpet has sounded. The time of awakening has come, and whether we tremble or rejoice, the reality remains. Prophecy is alive, truth is rising, and the world will never be the same.